The African Standby Force is an international, continental African, and multidisciplinary peacekeeping force with military, police and civilian contingents that acts under the direction of the African Union. The ASF is to be deployed in times of crisis in Africa. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia serves as the force's headquarters. Douala, Cameroon, was in 2011 selected as the site of the AU's Continental Logistics Base. Origins. Before the founding of the African Union in 2001, its predecessor Organization of African Unity did not provide appropriate tools for a collective and comprehensive acting of African states in times of violent crisis, mostly due to the shared value of non-interference into the internal affairs of states. During the 1990s, a series of violent conflicts in Africa, most importantly the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, urged the African states for a change in their common security collaboration. After the establishment of the OAU in 2001, the non-interference clause of OAU was no longer valid. The Constitutive Act now gave the OAU the right to intervene in a member state in grave circumstances, namely war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity. The same year, a new African peace and security architecture was presented. In order to build and strengthen African capacities for managing and resolving conflicts on the continent, the APSA comprises 5 pillars that complement one another: a Peace and Security Council, a Continental Early Warning System, a Panel of the Wise, a Peace Fund, and an African Standby Force. The ASF is therefore a constituting element of the APSA. The establishment of the ASF was directed by the Protocol relating to the establishment of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, which was signed in July 2002 and entered into force in December 2003. The key document explicitly recognized the roles of the RECs in promoting peace and security in Africa. For that reason, the final concept for the ASF, presented in the Maputo Report of July 2003, at the time provided for 5 regional standby brigade forces: a North Africa Regional Standby Brigade, an East Africa Standby Brigade, a Force Multinationale de l'Afrique Centrale, a Southern Africa Standby Brigade, and an ECOWAS Standby Brigade. The same document defined 6 ASF deployment scenarios. The organization at that time agreed on force levels of about 15,000 soldiers continent-wide. The Asf Policy Framework document from May 2003 aimed the development of the ASF in 2 phases. Phase 1. The AUs envisaged the establishment of strategic-level management capacity for the management of scenarios 1 to 2 missions, while regional economic communities, regions, would complement the African Union by establishing regional standby forces up to O brigade size to achieve up to Scenario 4. Phase 2. By the year 2010, the OAU planned to have developed the capacity to manage complex peacekeeping operations, while the RECs, regions, will continue to develop the capacity to deploy a mission headquarters for Scenario 4, involving OAU regional peacekeeping forces. 3 ASF roadmaps were developed to guide the operationalization of ASF. Roadmap I covered the period from June 2006 to March 2008. Roadmap 2 covered the period from April 2008 to December 2010. Roadmap 3 covered the period from December 2010 to December 2015. The ASF Roadmap 3 recognized that most goals of Phase 1 were not met until 2010 and therefore set the date for the achievement of the full operational capability to 2015. In December 2013, an assessment of the African Standby Force by an OAU panel of experts concluded that the ASF is unlikely to achieve FOC in 2015 without major efforts made by all stakeholders. Composition. Article 13 of the Protocol relating to the establishment of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union foresaw an ASF to be composed of standby multidisciplinary contingents. with civilian and military components in their countries of origin and ready for rapid deployment at appropriate notice. For that purpose, the protocol urged the member states to take steps to establish standby contingents for participation in peace support missions decided on by the PSC, or intervention authorized by the OAS Assembly. The strength and types of such contingents, their degree of readiness and general location should be determined in so-called peace support standard operating procedures, and shall be subject to periodic reviews depending on prevailing crisis and conflict situations. Mandate. According to the PSC protocol, signed in 2002, the ASF should enable the PSC to perform its responsibilities. Article 13 of the protocol specifically directs the following functions to the ASF: observation and monitoring missions, other types of peace support missions, intervention in a member state in respect of grave circumstances or at the request of a member state in order to restore peace and security, in accordance with Article 4 of the Constitutive Act, preventive deployment in order to prevent a dispute or a conflict from escalating, an ongoing violent conflict from spreading to neighboring areas or states, and the resurgence of violence after parties to a conflict have reached an agreement, peace building, including post-conflict disarmament and demobilization, humanitarian assistance, to alleviate the suffering of civilian population in conflict areas and support efforts to address major natural disasters, and any other functions as may be mandated by the Peace and Security Council or the Assembly. According to the protocol, the ASF is suggested to cooperate with the United Nations and its agencies, other relevant international organizations and regional organizations, as well as with national authorities and NGOs, where appropriate. The detailed tasks of the ASF and its modus operandi for each authorized mission are to be considered and approved by the Peace and Security Council, upon recommendation of the Commission. Mission scenarios. The Maputo Report and the Policy Framework for the Establishment of the ASF from May 2003 mentions 6 scenarios for the deployment of the regional contingents of the force in peace support operations, ascending in their complexity of structures, management efforts and resources for deployment and sustainment. Scenario 1. Regional military advice to a political mission. Scenario 2. Regional observer mission co-deployed with a UN mission. Scenario 3. Standalone regional observer mission. Scenario 4. Regional peacekeeping force for Chapter 6 and preventive deployment missions. Scenario 5. Peacekeeping force for complex multidimensional peacekeeping missions, including those involving low-level spoilers. Scenario 6. Intervention, e.g., in genocide situations where the international community does not act promptly as long-term goals for the deployment of the force. It was planned that Scenario 1 to 4 should be able to deploy in 30 days, Scenario 5 should complete deployment in 90 days, with the military component being able to deploy in 30 days, and finally, Scenario 6 implied that will be important the O can deploy a robust military force in 14 days. The ASF Roadmap 3 demanded the 6 mission scenarios for PSOs to be revised and adopted to new paradigms of peacekeeping, rapid deployment capability. The ASF Policy Framework and the Roadmap for the operationalization of the ASF called for the establishment of a rapid deployment capability, capable of intervening within 14 days, in cases of genocide and gross human rights abuses under Scenario 6. The RDC was decided to be an integral part of the regional standby forces to be deployed at the entry point, as a precursor to the deployment of a larger mission. At the end of 2013, the expert panel of the O stated that the goal, recommended in Roadmap 3, to test, evaluate and operationalize the RDC by 2012 was not met.